Nice. Winning. All right, so Mark is not with us live right now. He's actually speaking at a different church, but we will have Mark in a video that I'm going to share. He'll be featured prominently, so you will still get your Mark fix. In response, I told him I will not attend next week and everything will be all balanced out. I will not appear in a video, thankfully. So this morning, what we're going to do is recap a little bit of what we talked about last week. And then we're going to talk about a little bit more about wellness. We started introducing the idea of wellness last week, so we'll do that with a little bit more detail. And then we have the video that I promised where Mark is going to be with us. And then we'll have some conversation together. So that's kind of the plan if you're somebody who likes to have one. Last week, Mark sort of gave us an overarching theme that we're kind of marching around for the scope of our class of this Sunday school time together. And that was move toward it, sit with it, and get help if you need to. And Mark is a person that always will often talk to us about mantras, the values of having a mantra. It reminds you. So when we talk about mental health as a part of our overall wellness, what we're really wanting to focus on is the aspect of community and its role in caring for each of us around our own mental health or our entire wellness, which we'll unpack a little more today. But in doing that, we know the value of connection for healing, for growth, for our development, and for our wellness. Moving toward it, sitting with it, and getting help when we need to is kind of a nice way of approaching it. I think oftentimes when we talk about some of the scarier parts of support for others, when we struggle in ways that can feel intimidating and scary, sometimes we want to circle it and get help for it and then listen in if there's more needed. And I think regardless of the severity and acuity of what we're struggling with, having people in our community be with us and having the courage to be with others is far more meaningful often than even the help that we can go in and get for things that seem like they need bigger professional support. So that's really the goal of our Sunday school time together. Last week, we talked a little bit about the pandemic. One of the things about living through a pandemic is it's kind of a levels a playing field in that we all have had some exposure to some pieces of trauma, disruption. It has impacted our capacity to experience life in the way we're used to experiencing it. We highlighted some of the big ways that we're affected by a pandemic. We experienced disruption in our connection with one another, with the people that are really important to us. We experienced grief and loss. Sometimes that's big G grief, the loss of people, and how difficult it was to process and heal from that because some of our healing mechanisms were interrupted. We know there's a lot of loss of opportunity. People will often talk about loss of trips. We'll often talk about how hard it is to lean into plans, how plans get canceled and interrupted. So there's a lot of loss. There's loss of routine, which, our wellness is often found in structures and routines of our lives. So when that's interrupted, we experience that with even some symptoms. A lot of people during the pandemic would talk about interrupted sleep. I'm not sleeping in the way that I usually could sleep, and just sort of having to problem solve some of those really basic physical presentations in ourselves. Last week, we talked a little bit of the loss of control. I walked away with Sharon's words around control is an illusion, which is really true. And we absolutely live under sort of the belief that we have some control. And then there are spaces where we do usually exercise some control that is very real. When that's taken away, we can experience that in a way that makes us feel very uncomfortable or scared. So fear has been another feature of the pandemic, fear that is connected to illness, grief and loss, fear that isn't necessarily connected to anything very specific. And often that sort of loss of the control that we do usually hold will make us feel that sort of discomfort, but we're not really clear why. So those are some of the drivers that have been identified across lots of communities as reasons why the pandemic has been disruptive to us. And that disruption helps us have a conversation around wellness. We are all a little bit more attuned in. And I have that metaphor of study skills for this. Like study skills in high school didn't seem as important as study skills were in college. And wellness strategies and wellness skills and our sort of awareness about our own experience of wellness has always been important, but has become more important to us in the course of the pandemic, where it's highlighted for us why this is important for everyone. So that's kind of where we've come. Mark left us last week with a challenge to watch a 2.5-minute video. That was a Brené Brown video. She's a social researcher. And in that video, she talked about the difference between sympathy and empathy. And if you haven't had the chance to view that video, I would still challenge you to do it. It's worth it. We use that as a great conversation starter across a lot of different topic areas. But the point that she makes there is that our presence with being with someone, courageously sitting with them in hard spaces, is really a great gift. It is community, it is connection. And we oftentimes avoid that sort of empathetic connection. Instead, we pursue sometimes sympathy, and there are a lot of good reasons for that. And if we had lots of time together, we could talk about it. But the piece of the video, for the sake of this conversation and last week's conversation, that was really poignant was the end, where the one character says to the other, "I don't even know what to say. I'm just so glad you told me." And I think so often we avoid the sitting with it, moving toward it and sitting with it, because we don't know what we're going to say when we get there. Or, wow, I don't know how to fix this problem. That's really overwhelming. But the truth that we know is it's really not so much what we say, it's that we showed up, it's that we sat there, that we were with. And we know that's true, each of us, because we've had those experiences where other people have been with us. And in that being with, it takes away the aloneness and often the darkness of things that are really big and scary. And it provides a lot of opportunity for the connection and healing that comes after that. So that was really the reason that that video was kind of on tap there. Connection and community is something that I think church does well. I know our church does. I remember years ago when we experienced a miscarriage, and you hear a lot about people having experienced miscarriages, and that's hard. But when you walk through that on your own, that's overwhelming. And I remember people from our church really bravely and selflessly, vulnerably coming to me and telling me their miscarriage stories. And it was one of the most impactful parts of my healing, because I wasn't alone in that space. Other people had gone through it before, and so I knew that I could too. In fact, I had people who I see this morning who walked with me in those spaces as well. And that's a bonding experience that has changed us forever. I know there are so many topic areas where in our communities, we have people who come and they sit with us, and they have been with us, and it's transformative, not only in our relationships, but certainly in our healing. And there are also places where it can be scary and intimidating to imagine ourselves playing that role. When we talk about suicide and addiction in a couple of weeks, I know those are topic areas that it can feel overwhelming. I don't know how I would sit in that space. What would I do? What would I say? So really our class, this conversation is about being courageous to know that just bringing ourselves to that conversation can really be impactful. One of the ways that we can feel more confident to support other people is to just better understand ourselves and our own experiences. We're all created in the image of God, and we are more similar than different. So if we understand our own road and our own path, then we often have a little bit more courage to sit with other people and theirs, even when it can feel scary or intimidating. So when we move into a conversation about wellness, now you guys were promised a class about mental health, and we tend to talk about mental health more from the perspective of wellness because it incorporates more of the entirety of who we are. Wellness pulls in not just our mental and emotional health, also our physical health, our spiritual selves, our relational selves. There's so many parts of health that we don't necessarily think about. When I personally think about my wellness, I always, and this is weird, but I think about my inbox, my email inbox at work. And when that's disorganized, it usually reflects how I'm doing. It has a lot to do with how my day goes. So there's little pieces about wellness that stand out to you more than might stand out to somebody else. But looking at ourselves from the perspective of the whole is far more effective when we're looking at, are we actually well? I think about a lot of the people that we serve in our work, people who have some physical health diagnoses and also some mental health diagnoses, or which, to be honest, we all visit. So there are times when all of us would have experiences that we would say that could be the symptom of a mental illness. Certainly, if it lasts for a long time, that could become a diagnosis of a mental illness. But really, I'm kind of lost my mental and emotional mojo, just like we sometimes do in our physical health. Some of us are living with colds. Lots of us have been sick with even COVID, and we know that that loss of wellness affects us in a lot of different ways. It affects our investment in our relationships. Do you really feel like having that difficult conversation when you're physically not feeling well? Similarly, when our mental and emotional wellness is not great, we're not investing in other spaces with the same level of significance, or meeting with success, or having as much energy. When I think about people we serve, I know we've made a lot of investment around integrating health because they're so connected. For example, when we're serving people who have depression and maybe a physical health presentation like diabetes, if your blood sugar isn't stable or regulated, you're going to have a really hard time managing symptoms of depression. If your depression feels like I can't get any traction here, it's really hard to function or get out of bed in the morning, it's really difficult to be on top of your blood sugar or make good choices about what you eat and the rhythms of your physical self through the day. So we know things are connected. We know that our spiritual dimension has an awful lot to do with how we're engaging in relationships, our presence in community. Our physical health and our mental and emotional health have a lot to do with how sometimes we can approach our spiritual selves. I've had lots of conversations with people who will wrestle with whether my depression is a reflection of my sinfulness, or is my depression a clinical or a medical condition. And sometimes I've had conversations that talk about maybe it's not one or the other, but that all the dimensions of ourselves are important. I've never been a person without sin. I've always been a sinning person. So sin has a lot to do with all of my experiences. I also know that there are times where my wellness is affected in other domains, and it interplays with all those parts. So this investment in the whole of us is really valuable and important. We've been talking quite a bit in my workplace about wellness for a number of reasons. One, I know we'll have better employees and we'll deliver more product when our employees are well. That's a self. We also are focusing on wellness and work because the pandemic has affected our workforce, and our capacity to maintain quality service leans into a well workforce. As a part of that, we made a video. This is where we'll have Mark for our video, and try to find it. Right. Hope you guys can see that in a minute. I'll really hope you can hear it. This is a video where we pulled some of our employees together, and you can see Mark there. So we're going to get our Mark fix. And this is a conversation about wellness. And we've used this video around our workplace to support our internal conversation about noticing how we're experiencing our own wellness. How do you know when you're not great? And what do you do about it? What are the things that you'll hear some of the participants in this conversation talk about how they notice, and then what they've learned to do about it. And some of that has been a little bit pandemic influenced, And some people will identify maybe some crisis points that happened in their life that push them in that direction. After this video, this will go for about 12 or 14 minutes. We'll continue that discussion together. I'll invite you to talk about if the video triggered you to notice, or how you've over time noticed for yourselves when you feel some loss of wellness in some or parts of those wellness domains. And then what have you learned to do about it? Because in sharing this together, it helps us all become a little bit more consciously competent about how we're noticing our wellness. Can you guys just like wave your hands a lot if you can't hear this, or holler out? How do you notice when you've lost wellness a little bit, or how do you notice when it's time to sort of regroup and refocus? Jeff, you had an interesting perspective about that.
Yeah, so for me, I've had a lot of traumatic things happen. I've lost 3 immediate family members to suicide over the last decade or so. So on top of the having to pick up the pieces after each one of those traumatic experiences, I have anniversaries of that come up every year. I have the Velcro spots where because of the field I work in, sometimes I work with individuals who are suicidal, and I have to check myself around that piece. I'm usually the last one to know. So my way to deal with that is I surround myself with people who aren't afraid to let me know when things aren't looking well. Typically the most helpful is when people tell me the things I don't want to hear. That tends to get me over the hump and refocused on, all right, I need to do some intentional things for myself, because everyone around me has picked up on this and clearly now I need to do something.
So for me, this was well before the pandemic, but I found myself in a time of crisis. I wasn't going to just get better with time. Like, I needed to act specifically on it, but I wasn't sure exactly what to do about that. So that started a journey for me about just how do I be very intentional and active on my general wellness? How do I know? I've accumulated some of those people in my life that you're describing, which are people who get to say things to me, and I trust them to be careful with me, but also honest with me. And so I rely on those people as sort of some sounding board, some measuring of my wellness.
You go through life sometimes and things pile up and you are not being intentional. You are just going through the motions. And I loved when you said that in one of your trainings, because I was like, oh yes, I need to be intentional about my life and what I'm doing. And I need to slow down. I need to slow down and look daily at what it is that's affecting me. But yes, it took a crisis. And it all came out. And I needed to reach out to people who I didn't want. I isolate when I'm in a crisis myself. So that was hard, but it's such a good thing when you reach out and you develop relationships through reaching out. So.
And Erin, you felt like you were in the movie Groundhog Day.
Oh my God. I felt like this cycle was never going to end. When the pandemic hit and the kids started doing their virtual learning, it was exhausting. It was very exhausting. Having a son with special needs, trying to get him to do his stuff. My other son was fine. He could do it on his own. But having the 2 kids at home, having myself there, my husband then was with us, all 4 of us in the house, trying to deal with one kid yelling and screaming and having a fit because his computer wasn't doing what it was supposed to, and trying to find out the next step. Okay, now what do we need to do? Trying to find every possible way to help my son, who's on the spectrum, get things in order, put a routine to this non-routine situation. A mess. And it took a long time to finally get through it. So for anyone who's dealing with their kids and they have needs and you're trying to manage everything, realize that you can't do it by yourself. I was always reaching out to my staff What do I do? What do I do? Here's what we're trying to do. I can't get people to do what I want. I'm not getting the staff I need. I can't get a med change. He's not in the right school. All of these at once, and trying to prioritize what's the need. But thank goodness we finally got through that.
As a parent of a child with special needs, with all the chaos and the noise, where do you find the space for you?
I escape and I go knitting. So that's my thing. And also when I do go knitting once a week, and my kids and my husband know, where's mommy going? She's going to knitting. Okay. All right. I go to knitting and then I come home and then I'm refreshed and I'm ready to go. Some of my friends there have kids that have needs too. So it's a support group, unintended support group, but it works well.
Nice.
So.
Over time, I've learned about sort of what are the big pieces of wellness for me. And I think that's, we use the word intentional, but it's also, you have to learn over time. So it didn't just naturally come to me, oh, I'm not well, here I'm going to do the following 3 things and I'll become well. It's a journey of discovery, I think. And so what I've landed on is that wellness for me has, when I'm physically well, when my physical wellness is good, that spills over into other aspects of my life. I'm mentally better, I'm emotionally better. So physical wellness is one. My spiritual wellness is also important. And that gives me that sense of value and purpose and meaning and sort of that why. It sort of reminds me that there's things bigger than what I'm feeling right in this moment. And I see sort of some of that integration over time. Like my life makes sense over time better when that's healthy. And then the third part is really connection to other people. And that's that part that I had to learn. And you talked about the isolation piece. When I'm not doing well, sometimes I want to live in my head and try to figure it out. I just don't want to say it in front of anybody, and it's exhausting to explain it all and all those parts of it. So I had to figure out how to connect myself naturally, regularly with people so that it didn't feel like a big deal for me to strike up a conversation.
One of the things that I've learned through my wellness journey is the importance of having a wellness stool. And you hit on all of them. If you think of a stool has 4 legs. I look at this stool in front of me, and the 4 legs are wellness, our spiritual wellness, emotional wellness, mental wellness, and physical wellness. And so I'm terrible at it. It's something that I'm working on. But just the idea of waking up in the morning and saying, okay, what can I do today for my mental wellness, my spiritual wellness, my emotional wellness, my physical wellness? And I remember going to a session and just having her, she asked me to write things down. And I mean, it's simple. Physical wellness could be something as small as going for a walk, or emotional wellness could be just talking to a friend about what's going on.
But the thing that's true is those small little things make a huge impact.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why it's so important.
Absolutely.
That we take that time.
Yeah.
So I have a very tight inner circle, and there's a couple of outliers, here and there, but no one that I necessarily might go to for support. It's people that I enjoy being around. But there's certain places in the community that I find solace in. So most of them have to do with wooded areas or bodies of water. But I know that when I'm struggling, I go to Silver Lake, and there's a really nice path that goes around the lake, and I know I can go there.
Sometimes I go outside so that I can process something. So something hard has happened. And so I could sit in a room or I could talk to other people, but some of it is something I have to think through or process through myself. Going outside helps me to do that. And so sometimes I go out on purpose in order, I plan it. I'm going to go outside to think through this hard thing that's happened. And then I have places, sort of like what you were talking about with Silver Lake, you return to them over time, because that gives you that longer sense of my life is okay. This too will be past it. I'll get through this hard time. I've gotten through this hard time before. And remember, the last time I was here, there was a hard time, and I thought through it, and that's moved me forward.
I try to surround myself, and it's not easy with people who will uplift me or make me laugh, or if it's 3:00 in the morning and I'm stuck in all my thoughts, and I try to think of a memory like fishing with my dad and brother, to something happy to try to just get me out of all of the other negative thoughts. I will say, and I'll be brutally honest here, it's been really difficult with community though, because the people who surround me in my inner circle are also struggling all. And it's been a little difficult to find an inner circle in the last year and a half, 2 years, because everyone is struggling. So it's hard to find a balance of trying to find someone who will kind of be a support, but who you're not also supporting. Does that make sense? It's been a struggle. So, but I think maybe if you could just find one person right now, if you could just find one person, it's a blessing.
I mean, for me, it's acknowledging that the obstacles are there. It's, I alluded to this earlier. I have certain times of year, certain days where they're going to happen, and they're anniversaries of things that I couldn't control then, and I can't control now. So I need to be proactive around it. So maybe on a night where I know I'm not going to sleep really well, I throw some extra fruit in the bag for lunch the next day. Maybe I take an extra 20 minutes in my schedule and I put it on my schedule to take a break and go for a walk. So I think those are the things where you need to just be really intentional around, I'm going to do this because I know the train's coming and there's nothing I can do about it. So those are areas where I just try to plan, either make a plan or just, my plan is I'm not going to have a plan today. Sometimes that's helpful too.
You guys were all talking about noticing things in yourselves, noticing what your body's telling you, noticing what you hear in your mind. Have you guys always sort of noticed yourself in this way, or is that something you had to learn over time?
I don't think, I mean, I think I've had to learn it over time. I mean, I think I used to be the kind of person who would just go, and not pay attention to what it was doing to me, so this is something, and it's been, it really ultimately, it's a gift because it makes you more mindful, more in tune, better balanced, but that wasn't there for quite a while.
Totally agree with that.
Yeah.
I think it's so easy to just go and not focus on yourself for a second. I will agree with that. Personally, my own experience has been go for my son. But then when it comes to doing things for myself and my own well-being, that's on the back burner. So now we've gotten to a point where I've recognized, okay, I've done what I need to do for him. Now it's my turn to get everything that I need done. And it took quite a long time to finally get to that point.
Setting some boundaries or figuring out some things about work is helpful. I think just something I've learned to do that sometimes I'm surprised that I got to age 50 without knowing this stuff. Like how did that happen? So you asked me, what would I say to a younger person? I'd say, don't wait till you're 50 to pay attention. Things will go so much easier for you if you just don't do what I did. So, but one of the lines that I've learned to ask myself in a lot of situations, so some of them are work situations, some of them are not, is what in this can I control and what part of this can I not control? And actually listing it out. Like in this situation, there are some things I can do and there's some things I can't do. I find that historically, I would get most anxious over things I didn't have much control over, or I doubled down to try to fix something or show up right at work or convince somebody to try this thing. There were really things that weren't so much in my control. And when I learned to ask myself that, then what happened next usually got easier. I could let go of something that really wasn't in my control. I could stay in a helping lane and not swerve out of it, which was usually not good for them or myself. So some of my
Okay, so I want to bring us back, and that, again, that is an example of the conversation where, we just brought a group of people together to talk about what are some of the things that you do around wellness, things that you've learned. So I want to shift this conversation here to our group, both in the room and in the Zoom room, to go ahead and contribute your own thoughts as you were listening. What are some of the things that you come to notice are important in your own wellness? Because in sharing this, we encourage one another in ours. So I'm going to just open it up to us to throw out some ideas.
I guess starting out here, I would say that this is all like such a great tool for beginning a conversation on it, and it almost feels a little bit overwhelming because there are so many intricate parts that work together. And I think that's kind of the point, in that wellness is a combination of all these things. So it's almost hard to start talking about an area because it affects 5 different areas. So it's like, where do you even begin with this thing? But I think it's good to start there and then work into it. And then commenting further on personal wellness, actually, this week, I was realizing a new thing where I tend to be a person that lets things happen when I get stressed. And that's like naturally how, like they were talking about, like doing. I'm more a person like, I can't handle it. I'll just let it figure itself out. So this week, it was kind of like one of those tools to realize like what's going on. I realized that I'm a little bit more overwhelmed, so I'm reverting back to that. I'll just let it happen, rather than, okay, maybe this is something that I can't just let it happen because I'm managing. So like, I need to be in that area of like, I realize that I'm overwhelmed. I just can't let it fix itself. I need to do it. So that's kind of like one of the tells for me that I figured out this week or recently. But yeah.
That's a lot of great points. And I think one big takeaway, it's really hard. I was thinking about Matt McMillan and juggling the other day, because when I think about all the parts of wellness and how hard it is to keep all those balls in the air, not many people do it well, but almost anybody could probably sort of learn with like 3 balls. But just it's really difficult to manage all these parts. Yeah, what else?
I think being intentional to take time for yourself. You have your family depending on you, you have your job depending on you, you have outside sources depending on you. And it was the lady who said, I get away to knit or crochet. What she did, she was intentional for taking time for herself. So yeah, in your busyness of life, you have to be intentional to actually take time for yourself to do what you need to do to take care of yourself, but you take care of everybody else.
I think for me, it's helpful to think about what happens if I don't do anything about how I'm sort of feeling, and that makes me remind me that it's really not just about me. Like just like we talk so often about how sin, we often convince ourselves that some sin in our life isn't that significant because it only affects me, and it's just, I can deal with it, and it has no consequences beyond me. And then sure enough, it actually always does. Same thing, I think, with our wellness is like, we think that it's just about, well, okay, I'm not feeling super great, but if I just somehow bottle it all up and feel it all within me, and then it's just a me thing, and I'll just deal with it on my own, instead of acknowledging that actually when I'm not feeling good, I'm impatient with other people, or I don't make good decisions, or I take it out on somebody else without even realizing that I'm doing that, or it really, our wellness isn't just about ourselves. It's about how we, all the community that we've been talking about here is like, we're not going to have that good community if we insist that this is just a problem that I have myself and I can deal with it. That's going to damage relationships around us.
That's right.
I've found over the years, Romans chapter 5 is wonderful. And there's at the beginning of Romans chapter 5, it talks about how having been justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. That's something God did. And then it goes into how we rejoice in the hope of the glory of God. We also rejoice in our sufferings, knowing suffering produces perseverance, perseverance produces character, and character produces hope. So you have this very positive cycle of going from hope of the glory of God, but then hope and rejoicing in the midst of suffering. So the suffering is part of life, but then that produces perseverance or endurance. Endurance produces character, character produces hope. That's this very, very positive, hopeful cycle that's solidly based on Christ, which is really important. If we don't have that, I've found in my own self, my own emotions and my own experiences, I get into these very negative downward spirals. So you have like a choice between an upward spiral or a downward spiral, both of which include suffering. But you can get into this, sin and despair and guilt and broken relationships, and you can spiral down outside of Christ to hell. Thank God that Christ came and did what he did so that we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ to start. And then in that, we're all in that together, connecting with one another. And I've just found that it's not good for man to be alone. In my own, I know that from scripture, I know that from my own experiences. It's not good for man to be alone. And so I've been just very thankful for all the various people in my life. And I'm just thinking about how important those relationships are.
That's a great spot to kind of land the plane this morning, which is, it is not good for us to be alone. And when we're struggling so often, it's characterized by isolation and disconnection. And when we're in hard spaces, it becomes so much difficult to suffer in community, to be connected with others, to so many people in the video talked about being intentional, having a tight circle, having the people around us that get to speak into us when we're not at our best. So the value of community in these spaces and how God ordained that for our own well-being and capacity then to glorify him. We'll continue to have this conversation next week. Dave Eckert will be coming out to speak with us. And Dave is the director of our Intersect program. Mark mentioned him a little bit last week. Dave worked for a lot of years as the director of a program that delivers mental health service to adults in Montgomery County. He also is a pastor. He has his MDiv from what used to be biblical seminaries, now Missio. And he speaks very well about what the Bible has to say about mental illness. So he's going to come and speak to us about that next week, and we're looking forward to it. So thank you so much for being with us today. And by us, I mean that little piece of Mark that we also got to enjoy. And I hope that you all can stay safe this week, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, Jess. Thanks, everyone.